What's up, everybody? Rob here. So, Irish mythology, to say the very least, is a bit strange. Like many mythological traditions of early pre-Christian Europe, very little was written down directly by the participants of that particular culture, and much of the information about it has since been lost. However, enough of it has been preserved through various means, which I'll get into in a little bit, that we are able to piece together a reasonably good sense of the traditions of ancient Ireland, and I'm going to share that with all of you. So I suck at intros and transitions, so here we go. Irish mythology, a very brief look. So it all starts out with the Celts, who are an Iron Age people that held territory from Ireland and the British Isles all the way to Turkey, taking up most of what is now France, the Low Countries, parts of Germany, Austria, northern Italy, and, well, you can see the map right there. In any case, the Celts were not a unified people. They weren't a single coherent empire, but rather a collection of various disparate clans and tribes who were more than happy to fight amongst each other as well as amongst outsiders, including Iberians and Germans, and most significantly, the Romans. And it was the Romans who were the ones that actually put the Celts on the map. Now, they were mentioned by the Greeks at some point. They did fight a couple battles, raided here and there, but really it's the Romans that quite literally put them on the map historically. Now, the Romans were not particularly fans of the Celts. They were more than willing to massacre them wholesale, mostly out of revenge for what happened very early in Roman history when a Celtic tribe basically sacked Rome and took all of its wealth, and the Romans never they never got over it, and they had a complex ever since then. Then you got this guy, Julius Caesar, who you may have heard of. He's somewhat of a reasonably well-known individual. He showed up and basically butchered them wholesale, millions dead, the works. Now, what does this have to do with Ireland? Well, not much. The Romans never actually made it to Ireland, and there was a British governor who actually made plans, or at least speculated plans, to invade Ireland. However, they never quite got around to it. Why am I mentioning this? Well, I'm just giving you some basic backstory here. Now, contrary to popular belief, most of what we actually do know about traditional Irish belief systems were preserved by Christian monks. Now, there's this belief that Christian missionaries and monks would go into a non-Christian area and they would convert by force. They would destroy and suppress local beliefs, and for the most part, that actually was true. But for some reason in Ireland, the church took a very soft-gloved approach. There are various speculations as to why. Some believe that it was possibly for posterity, that the monks in Ireland wrote down the many of the tales, myths, and stories just for the sake of general posterity. Possibly there was some sort of sentimental value there, especially if the monks were from that culture. They might have had, a sentimental reason. They liked these tales growing up, so they copied it down, even though they converted to the Christian faith. Others speculate that it was a way of actually gaining converts. What they would do is they would learn about the local traditions, and then they would tailor Christianity to that. And that way they would help gain people to your own religion. And since the Celts themselves did not write down any of their tales, in any case it was the monks in their monasteries who actually preserved pagan tradition. Irish mythology is generally divided into 4 different groups or cycles: the mythological cycle, the Ulster Cycle, the Fenian Cycle, and the historical cycle. Within each cycle there are numerous works, various epics, poems, stories, tales, superstitious beliefs, etc., etc. I'm not going to be giving you a detailed blow-by-blow list of every single thing involved. I'm just going to give you a general overview, and I am going to be leaving a lot out for the sake of time, because you can make entire academic careers out of this, and we just don't have the time for that here. So I don't want to hear anybody saying, "Oh, but you didn't talk about the tale of this guy who did this." Yeah, I know. I'm leaving a lot out. General overview, people, just, work with me here. I just also want to point out that the cycles are in chronological order. So it starts at the beginning of Irish history, or Irish mythological history, and goes through in chronological order. So the mythological cycle explains events that happen in the Ulster Cycle, which then explains in colors events that happens in the Fenian Cycle, all the way up to the historical cycle. There is a continuity to all this. So I'm just making that clear from the beginning. This is, if not a coherent tale, at least there's some continuity to it. Okay, so it all starts off with the mythological cycle, which is the starting point for Irish mythology. It tells the tales of the Tuatha De Danann. They're on the screen, and yes, I'm probably mispronouncing that, sorry. who were a race of godlike beings. Now, I have to point out that the monks, although they were trying to preserve the traditions and the tales of the traditional Irish culture, they had to be very careful. They were, in fact, monks of a a very strictly monotheistic religion, and they had to be careful not to make this too obvious. Now, they never actually out and out say that these are gods, only that they are, say, very technologically or spiritually advanced people, but they never go out and say that they are gods. But if you read between the lines, it's pretty obvious that that's what they were. Any case, the mythological cycle explains how these Tuatha De Danann fought for and inhabited the Irish Isles, fighting for control over the land, and are one of the several successive waves of invaders to the island. Now, it's kind of confusing here, but here we go. Now, the first group to inhabit Ireland were refugees from the Great Flood, and yes, the one involving Noah and all that stuff, and so you can already see there's a Christian influence here. And eventually they are forced to leave due to various circumstances, which I'm not going to get into, and then their descendants come back and are forced to flee and then come back again in successive waves from all corners of the world. Turkey, the Caspian Sea area, Greece. Again, this shows very much outside influence. The Tuatha De Danann, they show up, and by this point, Ireland is inhabited by a people known as the Fir Bolg, or Men of Bags. At least that's what the translation is. And these were people who were enslaved in Greece, apparently, and were made to carry rocks and clay for building projects. Hence the name. They would have to carry, this earthen material in bags, and hence why they got the name Fir Bolg. Tuatha De Danann asked the Fir Bolg for half of Ireland. Their king, a guy by the name of Eochaid, that on the screen, he refused, and that leads to the Battle of Mag Tuired. Now, they fight on for 4 days, during which Nuada, king of the Tuatha De Danann, gets his hand cut off, although he and his forces still managed to carry the day. The Fir Bolg, at this point, were given the options of continuing the fight, exile completely from Ireland, or the possibility of simply dividing the land between them. There's some back and forth diplomatically going on at this point, various challenges and threats and such, but eventually they decide to divide the land amongst themselves. Now, the Tuatha De Danann cannot allow Nuada to continue to be king, as though he is no longer perfect. And any blemished person, especially somebody with his hand cut off, they are not fit to be king. Eventually, the god of healing, this guy named Dian Kecht, that made a replacement for him, but apparently that wasn't good enough. It was made out of silver, and apparently metal hands are not quite good enough. So, in any case, the Tuatha De Danann chose a guy named Bress, who is the son of the king of Fomorians, to rule over them. Now, the Fomorians were another wave of invaders to Ireland, and they were in no way friendly to the Tuatha De Danann. Why did they choose him? It's never explained, and of course nobody bothered to ask me about this, so hey, what do I know? In any case, this was an utter disaster. Bress decides to make them work like slaves and invited the Fomorians into Ireland, and they start taking over the place. This eventually kicks off a rebellion to overthrow Bress, which leads eventually to the second battle of Mag Tuired. The Fomorians were led by a guy named Balar. Basically, he's called Balar the Bale Eye because he can shoot eye beams that instantly kill people. Yeah, he's like Cyclops, but like way cooler. He just like shoots eye beams out and the person just like disintegrates and falls apart, and it's really awesome. Any case, there's another battle right there. Big epic throwdown, Lord of the Rings style battle. People are being hacked apart, being evaporated by eye beams and all that stuff. King Nuada comes back at this point. His silver hand is now completely healed. It has now flesh covering over the silver part of it. Why he didn't just do that to begin with, again, nobody bothers to ask my opinion. But in any case, he gets killed, and Balor, who every time he opens his eye, people start dying. He is killed by a guy named Luke the Long-Handed, who basically just like a David and Goliath sort of thing. He takes a sling and puts a missile, like a stone, right through his eye, and that kills him. Goes into his brain and kills him. Well, as you can imagine, the Fomorians freak out about this, and everything starts falling apart for them. King Bress is found alive in the aftermath of the battle and is spared on the condition that he teaches the Tuatha De Danann how to plow, how to sow and reap, and farming. One has to wonder where they got their food before this, but again, hey, this is mythology. Let's not try to make sense here. Any case, the Tuatha De Danann lived on as the rulers of Ireland until the coming of the Milesians, or the Celts, basically just normal humans. The Tuatha De Danann were then driven underground into fairy mounds, where they will eventually be making, I guess you can say, cameos in future stories. Some of the Tuatha De Danann that will be showing up later are guys by the name of Luke the Long-Handed, who I talked about a bit earlier. He will be prominent in several other stories. A guy named Dagda, who has a cauldron that never runs out of food, so that's pretty cool to have around. The Morrigan, who is the, guess you can say, antagonist in a future story that I'll be getting to in a little bit. And her name is not Morrigan, it's the Morrigan. It's more of a title. It means the Phantom Queen, or possibly the Dark Queen, or the Dark Lady. A lot of fun to have around. They would just be gods who would show up to help out a hero or to hinder them based on whatever the plot needs them to do at that time. In any case, this more or less wraps up and ends the mythological cycle. Next up is the Ulster Cycle, which tells a series of tales about the warriors of King Connachtbar. Now, there are many different point of view characters and tales and sagas within the Ulster Cycle. However, most of them, and the most famous ones, center around probably the most popular character in Irish mythology, a guy by the name of Cuchulainn. Now, this guy is probably the greatest superhero in all of Irish mythology. He's sort of like the Irish version of an Achilles. He's tall, he's athletic, handsome, he's skilled, he's competent. He's just like awesome in every way possible. He's an unbeatable warrior without peer, without match everywhere. He would also completely freak out and go insane. Like, he's like the Incredible Hulk. He would get angry and freak out and go through something known as the warp spasm. Unlike the Incredible Hulk, however, who would just, turn green and get, like, super muscular and then start raging around, stabbing everything, he would just, like, transform into this hideous hell beast. Gigantic muscles, like the Hulk, of course. His legs would twist around and knees would bend backwards. One of his eyes would be hanging off out of its socket by, like, the optic nerve, just, like, hanging out there. His internal organs would, like, somehow appear on the outside of his body. It's really, really fun stuff here. And most prominently, his hair would stand out on edge in massive spikes, so that if an apple or some other piece of, fruit fell on him, they would be skewered on it. There would also be, like, blood splurting from his forehead and foaming at the mouth, and just freaking insane here. And he would just go into these spasms and just start murdering pretty much everybody. So basically like the Incredible Hulk, but like way, way cooler. Now, the most famous and the most extensive tale, and it also happens to contain Cuchulainn, and it would be a tale called Tainbo Cúlainn. Whatever. That. Also known as the Calorade of Cooley, which features a war between Ulster and Connacht. The king and queen of Connacht, Ailill, and Medb. I don't get it. Why do Irish people have such impronounceable names and stuff? See, I think it's done deliberately to torment me. Any case, they're arguing about, the king and queen are arguing about who is wealthier. And the queen, not wanting to be the loser, tries to convince the owner of a very famous bull to lease the bull to her in order to win the bet with her husband. There's issues with this, of course, because nothing's ever simple. Shenanigans ensue. They try to take the bull by force. Everything falls apart from there. War breaks out, and lots of people die. The Morrigan and Luke the Long-Handed both make appearances, although Cuchulainn really is the hero of this. I will most certainly be breaking down what happened in the Calorade at Cooley at some point in the semi-near future, and by that I mean like the next year or so don't expect it next week or anything. Overall, the Ulster Cycle seems to depict Ireland as a lawless place with many different little petty kingdoms who are constantly fighting one another with very little oversight or rule of law. It's just these various little tribal and clan chieftains all at war with each other, and it's one of the closest glimpses of what life would be like in pre-Christianity Ireland. Right, next up is the Fenian Cycle. The Fenian Cycle details the life and career of Irish folk hero Finn McCool. And it's spelled that way you see on the screen, but I've heard it as Finn McCool, at least that's how you pronounce it. I'm probably wrong with that, but hey, it's pretty cool anyway. Awesome name, seriously. Anyway, it's him and his band of warriors going on various adventures, which are there. Now, the cycle itself is not a single coherent narrative per se. It's just really a collection of stories, poems, sagas, etc., including, but in no way limited to, Finn avenging his father, who was killed before he was born. He's training to become a poet, the eating of the salmon of knowledge, and it ultimately culminates with the death of Finn and most of his warriors at the Battle of Gabra. Now, this cycle is very complex, very convoluted. You have new characters coming in all the time. Characters are being killed off, but then resurrected at a later story. It's more like, I guess you could say, like a comic book series, where characters will come and go. It's not like it's telling a specific narrative like a chapter book, chapter 1 then leads to chapter 2, chapter 3. It's more of, as the plot demands or as it fits into the story rather than any sort of coherent narrative here. So sort of like, I guess you can say, like the Arthurian mythos. No, again, there is a story that involves with King Arthur, Guinevere having the affair with Lancelot and Mordred showing up, and you know that tale with that. But really, you'll have like a random warrior going off, like a knight going off on a quest, and okay, he's a knight of the Round Table, and he's at most tangentially related to King Arthur. He's associated with King Arthur, and you can take Arthur completely out of the equation, but it would still make sense as a part of the Arthurian legend or Arthurian mythos. Same thing here. You have a warrior or a group of warriors going off on various quests and side quests and stuff like that, and it's all associated with this particular cycle. So without going into any details as to what's going on here, that's more or less this particular cycle. It focuses on Finn McCool and his band of warriors and the adventures that they have. The final cycle is the historical cycle, which is also the shortest and is the one that has been most influenced by Christianity. It starts with the coming of Christianity by this British guy named St. Patrick, who you might have heard of, and it contains many actual known historical figures, including Brian Boru, who you see on the screen there, but also other kings and warriors, chieftains, and such like that. It also tells the story of Niall of the 9 Hostages and how he became the founder of the very powerful O'Neill clan, and how all that went down, as well as the history of King Con of the 100 Battles, as well as multiple others, which I'm not going to get into. We're already running long, and I want to move on from here. But basically, the historical cycle is a fusion of historical events along with mythology and folklore and legend. So, those are the 4 major cycles of Irish mythology. And even after the coming of Christianity, these 4 cycles would greatly influence Irish folklore. Tales of heroes, spirits, gods, various other entities like that would play a very prominent role in the folklore of the Emerald Isle. And even after the coming of Christianity, many of these folk tales, and especially the creatures of Irish mythology, played a prominent role in the culture of the island. So without any further ado, here are some of the more prominent and famous creatures in Irish folklore. Alright, now first up are the Aes-She. At least that's how I think it's pronounced, or just the she on occasion. Any case, if you look at this picture here, this is the same one I used for the Tuatha De Danann, and that was actually done very deliberately. After the Milesians, or the regular humans, the Celts, defeated the Tuatha De Danann, there was an agreement reached where the Tuatha De Danann would retreat underground, and they would live underground while the humans lived above it. And they retreated into what were known as the Fairy Mounds, which are basically, they're mounds all over Ireland. And they would live there as pretty much their abode. And indeed, their name actually means the people of the mounds. Now, these are probably the most complex and convoluted of all of the creatures that I'm going to be talking about here. There's really, it almost seems like a what I can gather here, a catch-all term for any sort of fey creature that inhabits the Emerald Isle, and it's more of an overarching category or an overarching characterization rather than a specific race, although they are oftentimes, like I said before, associated with the Tuatha De Danann. In any case, they can be extremely malevolent or benevolent, depending upon their mood that day, and the people of Ireland would be known to appease them by referring to them as the fair folk or the good folk. Whether or not they actually were that, you really didn't want to be on these people's bad side. So in order to keep them happy, offerings would be left out for them. And this continued on well into the Christian era. Offerings of food, especially milk and various types of fruit, would be left out for them to appease them. If they weren't appeased, they would commit a host of crimes ranging from the annoying all the way up to the downright disturbing. They have been known to spoil milk and destroy wheat crops, drive off and annoy various forms of cattle and other livestock, as well as kidnapping, torture, and ultimately murder of humans. And although they are oftentimes associated with fairies and other fake creatures, they are no way Tinkerbell. They will absolutely 100% make your life a living hell, and they're going to laugh while doing so. They're not going to be spreading pixie dust. Stay out of their way. Leave them alone. One of the major traits of the Aes Sídhe was their complete and utter inability to tell a lie. If they told you something, that means that what they were saying was the absolute truth. Now, that does not mean that what they're saying is necessarily right. It's all a matter of wording, and never make a deal with one of these guys unless you have a really, really good lawyer present, because they will twist their words and twist your words into getting what they want anyway. So even though they cannot tell a lie, they are ruthlessly untrustworthy. They were the inspiration for the Aes Sedai in the Wheel of Time series, of which I'm a pretty big fan of. And much the same way, they are not trustworthy at all. All right, next up you have probably the most famous Irish mythological creature. This is a leprechaun. Now, before they got involved in horror movies and in selling children's cereal, they were employed as cobblers, and as such, these little dudes would go around, spend their days basically making and repairing shoes. They are generally seen as benevolent to humans, always being helpful. Now, this guy here looks pretty evil, but I just thought it was a cool looking picture. In any case, they are, benevolent creatures and entities. They play practical jokes on people and they get a good laugh out of it, but they never actually harm anybody. Most of the time, they just little tricks on people just to be somewhat irritating, but somewhat endearing at the same time. As far as the legend of the pot of gold goes, well, these guys were immortal, and they would oftentimes find treasure and gather treasure, which they would, claim for themselves. And if you happen to capture one, it's not like you're entitled to his gold when you capture, at least as far as I can gather. It's so much as, these guys are known to be hoarding gold, and when you actually capture one, a lot of people just did that as kind of like a ransom to, okay, I'll let you go if you give me your gold. However, that doesn't mean you're actually going to get your gold. There's actually one particular tale in which a man captured a leprechaun and wanted to be taken to the gold, which was buried underneath a tree. The man didn't have any kind of shovel or way to get at the gold that was buried underneath there, so he took his, so he set the leprechaun free, and then he took off his garter that he had, basically just this little thing, this little wrapping he had on, a little piece of cloth, and he put that around a tree branch to mark the tree. And then he came back there and found that pretty much the entire forest had these pieces of cloth all over it, and he couldn't find out where the gold was. That's the kind of practical jokes you can come to expect from a leprechaun. So leprechauns are little tiny supernatural cobblers that are practical jokesters. Kind of annoying, but ultimately fun to have around. All right, so up next is the leprechaun's sadistic cousin, the Far Darig. Now, like the leprechaun itself, he is a short little dude here, and his name actually means the red man, or the man in red, depends on the translation, because that's exactly what he is. He's basically a leprechaun who, wears all red. And like his cousin, the leprechaun, he likes playing practical jokes on people. Unlike the leprechaun, however, his jokes are often twisted and sadistic. These creatures are master ventriloquists and can project their voices into opposite rooms. When humans go off to investigate it, he grabs the large burlap sack that is the size of a human, captures the human, and, runs off with them to do, who knows what. One of his favorite pastimes is swapping out normal human children for changelings, which are fairy children, and whenever that happens, a whole lot of shenanigans ensue, and he just finds the whole thing hilarious. He is oftentimes associated with very bad luck, so if you see one, bad luck is definitely headed in your direction, and you should take proper precautions. Exactly what those precautions are, I really can't say, except, be on your guard, and I don't know if these things are bulletproof, but if you want to take a couple shots at them, give it a shot. Look, your life is about to suck anyway, so might as well, go down fighting, blaze of glory. That's just me, though. You do with your lives however you see fit. So, Fardaric, kind of a douchebag. Next up is the Pooka. Now, the Pooka is sort of a demon-like bogeyman character who rides around at night, almost exclusively comes out at night, and terrorizes the local populace. Now, the physical form of a Pooka does change from story to story, and actually by region to region. Some regions say that he is a large eagle-like creature. Some say he's kind of like a bogeyman, like this twisted, deformed, man-like creature. Most stories, though, depict him as a dark horse with glowing red eyes that you see here, sometimes golden eyes, but details. Any case, these are creatures that are almost universally seen as malevolent and will, basically make your life a living hell. They trample over crops, which is devastating to an agrarian culture, terrorize livestock, and occasionally drive them off or kill them outright. Also, they can perfectly mimic a human voice. So when you're out there at night in the middle of the wilderness, which, again, like I've stated in previous videos, is always a bad idea. No story ever ends well with. I was walking out in the middle of the night in the middle of the forest, and, it ends with happily ever after. In any case, you hear a perfect human voice, you go to investigate it, and then the Pooka then does whatever it does to you. It either captures you, it kills you, it drags you off to the other world, really whatever it feels like doing at that particular time, and none of it is good for you. Farmers had a tremendous respect for the Pooka and would often leave out a portion of their crop as a way to appease it, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it doesn't, but hey, it doesn't hurt to try. And since we're on the topic of evil horse-like creatures, next up is the Kelpie. Now, the Kelpie is an aquatic horse-like fairy creature that likes to capture and kill humans. I think you're seeing a recurring pattern here. In any case, they appear as a horse with a soaked wet mane, and that's their primary appearance. Beyond that, they look pretty much like a regular horse. For some reason, they have this strange ability that whenever somebody sees one, they have this compulsion of wanting to ride it. I don't get it. No, but then again, maybe it's hypnosis, maybe it's just, plot requires this to happen. In any case, people feel compelled to ride the Kelpie, at which point they sit on it, and the Kelpie's skin turns into a powerful adhesive. It doesn't actually explicitly say this, but yeah, pretty much that's what happens. The person then sticks to the Kelpie, who then goes riding off into the water, where the person either drowns or is trapped there for eternity because, there's never any sort of explicit explanation as to how somebody survives being trapped underwater, for eternity, being tormented there. But it does happen, and I'm not really going to question it. So if you're ever just wandering around and you see a random horse showing up, don't ride it. I mean, that's just common sense. Even for regular horses, you don't know where they've been and, what they're into. And it might be a Kelpie, and you're going to be, your day's about to get really, really bad at that point. Now, what we have here is one of the more famous spirits of Irish mythology, and that is the Banshee. Now, the name Banshee means something along the lines of woman of the fairy, like the eyes she. Well, Banshee means woman of the she. Any case, they are spirits that forewarn of death. Now, contrary to popular belief, they actually don't harm people directly. What they are instead are harbingers of death to come. There are many, many different tales involving them, and each one has a slightly different take on who they are and what they do. Any case, generally speaking, they can, according to at least some legends, they can only warn members of 5 major Irish families: the O'Neills, the O'Briens, O'Connors, O'Grady's, and the Kavanaghs. Others don't really state this exactly. That's more of a legend, and it's almost like a mark of prestige for these families. Like, look, we're important enough to have this supernatural warning system. Any case, whether it's for a powerful family or just an average person, whenever somebody sees one, it's a harbinger of death to come. Now, she could appear almost exclusively as female, whether she's young or old or middle-aged or whatever. It, again, depends on the version of the story. But in any case, she's oftentimes seen as washing clothes, usually the clothing of the person about to die. Now, they're most well known for is their screeching noise, which again is a harbinger of things to come. So when you're out at night, again, why are you out at night? Stop doing that. But if you hear a loud shrieking cry, it means death is imminent either for you or your family. Make proper arrangements. Some people have theorized that the shrieking cry is actually that of a fox, which if you've never heard a fox screech, it's actually pretty terrifying. So there it's like, all quiet at night and you hear this loud, high-pitched screeching noise. It's kind of it'll freak you out, no doubt. And that's probably the source of the Banshee's legend. Banshees are often associated with the Morrigan, who is the Irish goddess of death, and is often depicted as the queen of the Banshees. So in spite of their terrifying appearance and reputation, they're actually, I wouldn't say harmless necessarily, but they act as a warning system and actually could be seen as a point of prestige. So there you go, the Banshee. And finally, we have the Dullahan. Now, the Dullahan's name means the headless, because that's exactly what he is. He is a headless horseman, and that's probably what inspired the story of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Anyway, the Dullahan is another harbinger of death, much like the Banshee, except while the Banshee will simply screech and, just sort of point out that the person's going to die, he's going to go riding through, towns and villages, all gates that were in his way will open up in front of him. Even if they're locked, they're just going to open up. And he's going to start shouting out the person's name in the middle of the night, terrifying everybody. He's probably like the most metal creature in all of Irish mythology. I mean, he rides around dressed all in black. He's got his head in one hand. In his other hand, he has a whip made out of human spine that he uses to make all kinds of noise and actually whip people with. See, he hates when people actually look at him, which is kind of counterintuitive. You'd think if you're making all this noise, people are going to look in your direction, but okay, fine, whatever. If you look at him, he'll either throw a giant basin of blood on you to obscure your vision, or he's going to whip you right in the face with this skeleton spine whip thing that he has, and hopefully blind you that way. These creatures don't play a particularly prominent role in Irish mythology. However, they're just too cool to pass up. Anybody out there, aspiring writers, fantasy writers, especially urban fantasy, anything like that, you got a ton of inspiration. I want to see some, stories with this guy in it. It's awesome. Get to it, people. Make it happen. So that's pretty much it. Just a very brief introduction into Irish mythology and Irish folklore. I can go in much further depth. There is a wealth of information out there, so hopefully this video inspired you to go look up this absolutely fascinating topic. By all means, please do so. It's absolutely interesting. And yes, I will be covering specific stories and tales in depth in later videos. When they're going to be coming out, whenever I get around to it. In any case, hit the like and subscribe button. More videos will be coming out whenever I get around to it. And that's pretty much it. Have a good day, or don't have a good day. You're adults. You can have any kind of day you want. I believe in freedom. See ya.